Welcome to the show, guys. We have a really good one lined up for you today. First, if you'd like to support this channel, there's PayPal and Patreon links in the info box below. And we have the beautiful Betty Van Velsen. How's it going, Betty?
Yeah, great. I'm fine. How are you all?
10th man.
I am doing great. Thanks for having me.
And the principal, Bible literalist, Paula. How's it going, ma'am?
Going all right.
What you got for us today?
Early church councils, I use the term church loosely just because everybody knows what it means. Well, roughly what it means. But that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to get to the bottom of Nicaea and Constantine, primarily.
Yeah, the church part of that is very important, right? Now that you said that, I was thinking about that earlier too. I was thinking how she was going to go about that, but yeah, we could use that term a little bit loosely in this case.
Yeah, it refers to Christianity in general for the most part, but it has a lot of baggage. It's not original to the New Testament. New Testament says ecclesia, which means any kind of gathering, assembly, congregating, which is where you get the word congregation. It's just a gathering of people. It was also used for an angry mob of heathen at one point in Acts. So it's not a special word, but it came in time to refer to, wherever you want to say the origin of the word church is. In German, it's Kirche, I believe, and somewhat. I'm sorry, Kirche.
Kirche.
Kirche. Yeah. I don't do my non-English sounds very well, but yeah, some people say it's somewhat derived from the name Circe or Kirke or what some other goddess from history, but the point is that in English it refers to a group of Christians, and I would prefer not to use that word, but it's most familiar, so we'll just run with it today.
Well, this is a pretty interesting subject, and 10th and I were talking because, and I'll let 10th speak his part, but it's been a long time since I looked at this. I can remember it coming up back in the day a lot, and there was mass confusion. I don't know whether it was purposeful confusion about these church councils and their authority and what they did, but this is going to be really interesting. I got the pen and paper out. I'd suggest you guys out in the audience too, if you're not familiar with the topic. You know what? This goes without saying. With any topic that Paula's going to discuss, it's good to have a pen, piece of paper out, and so you have the questions, you can write them down, you don't forget them. Right? What about you, 10th? You familiar with this subject?
Yeah, I studied it back in the day. When I first became a Christian, I wanted to know where the Bible came from, and I ran into this topic, and so I have a few books in my library stored away in the garage, and I found it very interesting, so it's a good refresher for me again.
Betty, any experience? Has anyone challenged you or brought up the topic of the church councils, specifically Nicaea?
Yeah, I've heard a lot about it, but because I don't know the depth of it, I stayed away a little bit from the discussion about it.
Yeah.
I did look into it myself, and I thought that a lot had to do, but I think that Paula will correct me or say otherwise, or maybe confirm that it was more like discussions about the Trinity, something like that. And I dropped it because I thought, well, I got better things to do.
Yeah, right. I
yeah, because you can get to the depths of this, and I think it's good to know how it really is, of course, but. Yeah, I wanted to be going through a lot of other stuff as well. So there's so much to cover, right?
Outstanding. Paula, you ready?
I'm ready to roll, and
okay.
Just FYI,
can we do
not
two separate chats then before we begin?
Yes.
Okay, I was just going to say I'm not looking at the chat at all at the watch screen, so
Well,
Okay.
I was looking at the chat because I have my new phone, but it's a critical system update. Great timing.
You can get rid of that thing. Come on, man. Just go to your
Yeah, but
regular.
go ahead with the admin, please.
Okay, yeah. So you got a super chat from Sam Hine, and he posted a sticker about I think it's a hippo. I don't know, on the wheelchair, the office chair.
In a fishbowl?
Um,
Is the hippo in a fishbowl? Sam, this is a different discussion. Wait for the next live show with the black swan. That's like shooting hippos in a fishbowl. But thanks, I appreciate it.
And we got a super chat from Michael B, and he says, "Thank 010 or 101. I don't know, 010 something like that. 110, 010. I don't know, something."
I don't know. It's something. Hey, I appreciate that, gentlemen. All right, Paula, you are up and ready to go.
Alrighty, as you can see here, we're going to cover these important councils in church history, important as in backdrop, context, not so much as doctrine as concerns the Bible itself, because that's what my specialty is. It's not necessarily history, but you do need to study it because it's part of the context. And when we talk about main councils, we're talking about mostly the ones that involve all of so-called Christendom, because there were many that did not. The Council of Jamnia is one of those. But let's start with the Council at Jerusalem around 50 AD. So just past the ascension of Christ and the what's called the apostolic period, that is to say the time when there was any of the 12 apostles alive. And the last one to leave this earth was the Apostle John in the late 90s AD. So just to give some backdrop to that. And so I'm going to read through most of Acts 15 to tell you what's going on. Pay attention to why the council is convened and what their decision was. So it says, people came from Judea who were teaching, and this is my translation, so unfamiliar terminology. People came from Judea who were teaching the brothers and sisters, that is to say Christians, that if you are not circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. They were making it a salvation issue. And there was a big dispute going on among them as Paul and Barnabas, his traveling partner, arrived. So those two and some others were sent to Jerusalem to see the ambassadors, typically, traditionally, apostles. An apostle, ambassador means the same thing. Someone sent out, and the important thing is who did the sending. That's what matters. That's why we have a special term, apostles, for them. Apostolos, the Greek word meaning to send out. And so the important thing is that they were sent out by Jesus himself. So that's what makes someone an apostle and why there can't be any more of those. Anyway, they went to Jerusalem to see the apostles, the ambassadors, and elders in Jerusalem about this matter. So we see why there's a council being convened. It doesn't have anything to do with a command from God to have a meeting, just to make that point. Having been sent out by the congregation, this was typically translated church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria. As they went along, they described in great detail how the non-Judeans, that's the term in Greek, or it's what it means. It either says Greeks or sometimes barbarians, but mostly Greeks or Gentiles in the New Testament. But it means non-Judeans. Okay, how they were being converted. And when they arrived in Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the congregation and all these people. But, verse 5, some from the Pharisee sect who had come to faith stood up and insisted that the non-Judeans were to be circumcised and to keep the whole law of Moses. Hat tip to Hebrew roots people. They had this going on in the first century. The Hebrew roots people, Pharisees who had become Christians, and said, you got to keep the whole law of Moses. So there's the backdrop for the meeting. So the ambassadors and elders convened a meeting to resolve that matter. That's all it was for. That point that needed to be resolved because there was a problem and it had to be faced. After much discussion, Peter, no less than Peter, stood up and addressed them. Folks, fellow believers, you're well aware that early in the beginning, God chose me from among you to speak to the non-Judeans and tell them the word of the gospel. Gospel means good news, so they could believe. And God, who knows people's hearts, testified on their behalf by giving the Holy Spirit to them, just as he did to us. He did not draw any distinction between us and them, cleansing their hearts by faith. So why are you now provoking God by putting on their necks a harness that neither we nor our ancestors could bear? That being the law of Moses, not the Talmud, as some people try to make it say that they were having a problem with Talmudists and their traditions. That's not what's being talked about. It says whole law of Moses is the point of debate. And Peter says, no, it is through the favor of Master Jesus that we believe and are saved the same way they are. The crowd listened as Paul and Barnabas gave testimonies, and then no less than James, the half-brother of Jesus, responded. So these are the big guns in the early Christian faith. It says, folks, fellow believers, hear me, Simon, Peter, Cephas, they all mean the same person, informed us about how God first visited the non-Judeans to obtain a people belonging to him. This agrees with the words of the prophets, that as is written, after this I will return back and rebuild David's fallen sanctuary. I will rebuild and restore its ruins, so that the rest of humanity may seek out the Master, or the Lord. That's what Lord means. All the nations who call on my name, says the Master who does all this, whose work he had known from before the ages. So James is citing this passage as having to do with the fact that God was now turning away to go get more people, and then will turn back and rebuild David's fallen sanctuary. So there's a switch in focus that he's talking about. And because of that, that's what the saying is, when you see a therefore, ask what it's there for. Because of what was just said, he says, it is my judgment that we should not harass the non-Judeans who are turning toward God. So he's agreeing with Peter. He says, instead, we'll write a letter to them saying these really minuscule little things, which mostly have to do, besides the ceremonial pollution issue, is specifically Jewish, but being promiscuous or eating any animal that has been strangled or still have its blood. And just to make a side note on what this means, animals still with its blood in it, it's pretty gory, but the practice among some of the ancients at that time, this was not just a Jewish thing, was that since you didn't have refrigeration or anything, you had a flock, but you didn't want to kill the whole animal. You cut off one of its appendages and ate that and left the animal alive. That was pretty nasty stuff. So I don't think anybody would have an objection to this little rule about what the Gentiles should also do. They should also have a heart. They didn't have the Jewish law that told them not to do that. So that's why it's being emphasized here for the Gentiles, because that's who this is about. And he says, for the laws of Moses have been proclaimed from ancient times, every city, and they're read in every synagogue on every Sabbath. In other words, let's be sensitive to the culture. This is not a mandate from God to always obey all the Jewish laws. That was what both he, James, and Peter objected to and said, no, you don't make them obey the laws of Moses, but be considerate of the culture and try not to upset them too much. All right, that's all they're saying. And so they wrote this letter, et cetera, et cetera. So is there any question about why the council was convened, who brought the objection, and what the decision was by the apostles in 50 AD? Questions?
No, but I loved your hat tip. Thank you. I wrote that down, hat tip. And you got my full attention. This is going to be very interesting. 10th.
No, I think the passage says it plainly that outsiders were coming in, the Judaizers, and they wanted to change the message. And these true Christians got together and had a council as to what and how to deal with this. So if this is the reference to the very first council, it's pretty obvious why they met.
Betty.
Yeah, I've looked into this, and I've heard some teaching also over about this. I do not quite go by the whole abandonance of the law of Moses in that sense. I just think that because they preached this to the Gentiles, which weren't totally into the whole Bible, the Torah, basically, what was known then, and that they had to be taught. I mean, even the new people of the Israelites or the Jews had to learn the Torah in a certain way. So I'm agreeing on that they didn't have to be circumcised and all that, but I don't think that the whole law is basically banned.
May I address
But
this?
yeah, sure, you can.
Yeah, I think there has to be clarity here because I ran into people with the same concern you have. So when Christ came to fulfill the law, he kept all the law, he was perfect, he's our substitution, and in him we are saved, not of our own works at all. Now, that doesn't mean after you get saved that the law of God is void. God forbid. Because see, now as a true Christian, the Holy Spirit comes and lives in the new person. The Christian is a Christian because the Holy Spirit resides in you. And now the Spirit teaches you all things, and especially with the scriptures that we have at hand with the Bible, it's very clear God is holy. So without even knowing the Ten Commandments, if a person is a Christian, the Spirit of God is going to teach that Christian the whole law, because it's not that we're saved by it, but because God is holy, we should live holy. We resemble our Father in heaven.
Agree.
Yeah, so there's
Yeah,
no conflict.
I know there is not a real conflict, but there is still that God or Jesus even said that one tittle of the law wouldn't go away, right? Even before heaven and earth, right? So things have been accomplished or established. But I think that you're correct.
Yeah, but even that reference.
And but it's a walk basically that you have to go through in life with Jesus. And when you're just being born again, right? Suppose that you're being baptized, and you have to sort of get into that and get into that way of life and shake some old habits. And I think that the people that were spoken of in Acts 15, the Gentiles, they were sort of idol worshippers, right? They had all these other kinds of things, and that was, I think, the easiest to address first, to get rid of, because that was really an abomination to God, to have these idols that they would worship.
Yeah, but you see, you answered your own question there. Because they became Christians, they obeyed the law that was written of not worshiping idols. It's automatic.
Still, I think that they had to be taught.
Of course, the scriptures.
Yeah.
I would just remind that in 15:5 it says the point here is that the Pharisees said the non-Judeans must be circumcised and keep the whole law of Moses. That was the point of debate. And the decision of Peter, James, and John was no, they must not.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but we will get into the matter of Israel versus the church and who's under the law in the next presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a topic of its own. Yeah.
I understand. But later in the text, I think also in Acts, there Paul also makes a sort of a vow, and he shaves his head. It's also according to the Jewish laws or the laws of the Israelites, which is mentioned in Numbers. So Paul still held to certain things of what was written in the Torah, right?
Well, like I said, we'll get into this next time. That's a different topic, really. What we're trying to do here is talk about church councils, what this one was about, and what the decision was, and why it was convened.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a outstanding topic next week. I can't wait.
Yeah, can I read some super chats?
Yeah, do we have some admin?
Yeah, we got Emma UK, and she has a super chat, and she says, "Thank you, Paula," with a heart and hands that pray. And we have Rakia Live, and he says, "Have questions, seek God. Think you have answers, seek God. There is power in His name." So that's a good thing to do.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Paula, I didn't take you off screen, so you're good to go whenever you want to get started.
Okay, let's do the Council of Jamnia 90 AD. So we're still not very far from the time of the apostles. And standard disclaimer about this site or any other site, I don't agree with everything there, but they have a handy list here, so that's just the one I'm bringing up. Let's just find out what the council was about very briefly. The rest of this page, which is fairly long, goes into the details of what they're going to claim, and you can look that up. We have a link in the description, I think. So we'll just look at the first section here, the introduction mainly. 90 AD, the Council of Jamnia was unimportant in determining the Jewish canon, just to make that point. Number two, it was not a major council like Nicaea, but a small collection of rabbinic Jewish leaders. Number three, they did not gather to determine the canon of the Old Testament, but rather limited their discussion to the books of Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon. Those were somewhat iffy, and that's what they wanted to talk about. It's only whether those should be included, not whatever any other books, okay? Point four is really where the heart of it gets to. Roman Catholics and Orthodox being the Eastern and Western legs of the same thing. What is most people's idea of what the quote-unquote church is. We have Eastern Orthodox and the Western, which is really what Roman Catholicism is, the Western leg of it. So it says here, they misrepresent history when they make claims that the canon of the Old Testament was not fixed until the Council of Jamnia in 90 AD. This is not true. They desperately don't want to be bound to following the Bible. Roman Catholics and Orthodox leaders feel that rewriting history to suggest the canon of the Jews was not fixed until after the Jewish system was abolished in 70 AD is as absurd as it is wishful thinking. Think about it. Only after God destroys the Jewish religion, don't go too far with that, do the Jews get a fixed canon? It makes no sense at all, the claim of both Eastern and Western Catholics, basically, to say it's just nonsense to say that God waited until he dispersed the Jews to solidify their canon. Makes no sense at all. And point five, there was clearly a fixed canon long before Jesus was born, and when Jesus was tempted by Satan, actually, this is not the best edited site. So when Jesus was tempted by Satan, in our biblical account, 3 times, 3 different temptations, Jesus did not reply, human man-made church tradition says this or that to Satan. Okay, that's not what Jesus said. All 3 times Jesus said, it is written. So there's a reference, Matthew 4, 1-4. It is written, referring to the Old Testament canon. So in other words, the devil did not ask, written in what? Written where? That's the important thing. So the point is that everybody, even the devil, did not dispute the source of what Jesus was quoting. The devil himself was quoting from it. And Jesus didn't dispute what the devil was quoting. They were both quoting an established canon when they quoted those things, is the point. And then I said you can get the details down here, their sources for all their claims that they put up here in their introductions. So the Council of Jamnia really wasn't a big deal in itself. It just was talking about those 2 books of Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon, which are still somewhat disputed by people, but eventually the group of Christians as a whole, who are the only people who can decide what's in their sacred writings, people outside the faith have nothing to say about it. But it was decided that these were, in fact, belonging in the scriptures as authoritative in some way, and that the history of given by Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox is twisted because it wants to say that they determined the canon, which is the charge that the critics bring against Christians, but it's a false claim in the first place. So they're really burning a straw man when they take as true the Roman Catholic testimony and the Eastern Orthodox testimony about when the canon was fixed. They take that as true and then argue against it when it's false in the first place. So just to make that little point about Jamnia, and now we're going to get into the main meat of the presentation. So I guess I'll stop again real quick. Any questions about Jamnia and what it was and was not about?
I call it Yamnia, but that's not a big deal. Very well played. Devil, written in what? I love it when common sense just takes over. Right?
Yeah.
Very well done,
Yep.
Paula. 10th?
Yeah, there's not much I could add. I remember when Jesus went into the synagogue and opened the scroll, what was he reading? What was it called?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Betty?
I've never heard of this one before, so it's totally new for me. I have to look at it some more. Yeah, no.
Yep. The only
I'll be
reason
glad.
like I said, the only reason it was brought up is because people in the critics will use the twisted version given by the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches and say this is what these are the people who invented your Bible or decided your canon, when nothing even close to that is true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very little scrutiny needed here.
Yeah. Can I shout out some super chats?
Yes, go ahead.
It's been very chatty tonight, so I will give a super chat from James Mays. Myers. He says, hello to the panel. Share the show, folks. Smash. And we got a response by Colin Dresser, and he says, James Mays sent me here. And then
Hey,
thumbs
thanks.
up. And
Thanks. Thank you, James. Appreciate that, sir. And Colin, thank you very much. All right, is that it?
For now, yeah.
Paula, I didn't take you off. You're ready to roll.
All right, let's get into it. And what I might do is read these two paragraphs and then we'll go chase down our links because there's a point to be made. And first, we need to know what was percolating before the council was convened from historian Philip Schaff in his History of the Christian Church. You got a link there you can chase down. I'm not going to chase that one. Chapter 4, Section 42, Clergy and Laity. And I have an excerpt here, and we're going to look at that one in a minute. But the term, in case people don't know what sacerdotalism is, that is used in that excerpt, it's the belief that there must be a priesthood mediating between God and people. Now, we're going to check this other source in a bit. Also, the primary agenda was on the deity of Jesus and the celebration of Easter. That's it. There were a few
Really?
other little, I'm sorry?
I said, really?
So,
Okay.
Yeah,
so say that one more time. The first council at Nicaea was for what specifically?
The deity of Jesus and the celebration of Easter. Those were the two main items on the agenda. There were other little things, but those were the main ones.
Appreciate
We'll
that.
Not the
talk about-
Trinity?
Huh?
Not the Trinity?
No.
Oh,
Well, that's by extension involved in that, but they didn't discuss it.
okay. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but it was really surprising me. So, okay, good. Continue.
Oh,
Sorry, I won't interrupt.
And we'll get to the details, but Constantine the First presided when mostly as a moderator, but it set the precedent of a government official being involved in church matters. That's a really big deal. It followed the 313 AD Edict of Milan that officially ended Roman governmental persecution of Christians. And this is the lesson we need to learn from it. Decades of severe persecution, being fed to lions, I'd say was pretty severe, couldn't stop the faith from spreading. But offer peace to the weary, and they will be very tempted to accept the government's involvement. This was the birth of tradition over truth, the fake over the genuine, and it's this that most of the world considers Christianity. And I point this out because it's not enough to merely claim a cover-up. We must have evidence, and that's what I'm going to present. So this is a big, big deal. So now let's go look at this excerpt first of all. Let me make that a little bigger. This is from my book, You Are All One, Against Hierarchy. This is one of the appendices. And this is the excerpt. It's fairly long, but I need to read through it. The idea, because this is the stuff that happened before that council convened. The idea and institution of a special priesthood, distinct from the body of the people, with the accompanying notion of sacrifice and altar, passed imperceptibly from Jewish and heathen reminiscences and analogies into the Christian church. That is to say, it's external, it's not in the New Testament. The majority of Jewish converts adhered tenaciously to the Mosaic institutions and rites, and a considerable part never fully attained to the height of spiritual freedom proclaimed by Paul or soon fell away from it. He opposed legalistic and ceremonial tendencies in Galatia and Corinth. This is a matter of record of Paul's letters. And although sacerdotalism does not appear among the errors of his Judaizing opponents, the Levitical priesthood, with its three ranks of high priest, priest, and Levite, naturally furnished an analogy for the threefold ministry of bishop, priest, and deacon, and came to be regarded as typical of it. And again, this is not from the Bible, it's tradition replacing it. Still less could the Gentile Christians as a body at once emancipate themselves from their traditional notions of priesthood, altar, and sacrifice on which their former religion was based. Whether we regard the change as an apostasy from a higher position attained or as a reaction of old ideas never fully abandoned, the change is undeniable and can be traced to the second century. Second century, that's post-apostolic. Okay? And very soon, as soon as they were gone, this happened. Before Constantine, before Nicaea, the church could not long occupy the ideal height of the apostolic age, and as the Pentecostal illumination passed away with the death of the apostles, the old reminiscences began to reassert themselves. And then I skip down. After the gradual abatement of the extraordinary spiritual elevation of the apostolic age, which anticipated in its way the ideal condition of the church, the distinction of a regular class of teachers from the laity became more fixed and prominent. This appears first in Ignatius, who in his high Episcopalian spirit considers the clergy the necessary medium of access for the people to God. This, of course, is very, very heretical according to the New Testament. Quote, whoever is within the sanctuary or altar is pure, but he who is outside of the sanctuary is not pure. That is, he who does anything without bishop and presbytery and deacon is not pure in conscience, end quote. This is what Ignatius wrote. Yet he nowhere represents the ministry as a sacerdotal office. So they're saying this happens in stages. First they say this is a thing, and then eventually they codify it and make it a law. So that hadn't happened yet. The Didache, or however you want to pronounce that, an early Greek written teaching, calls the prophets high priests, but probably in a spiritual sense. Clement of Rome, in writing to the congregation at Corinth, draws a significant and fruitful parallel between the Christian presiding office and the Levitical priesthood, and uses the expression layman as antithetic to high priests, and Levites. This parallel contains the germ of the whole system of sacerdotalism. That's the point of why I'm reading through this. This is before Constantine. But at best is only an argument by analogy. Tertullian was the first who expressly and directly asserts sacerdotal claims on behalf of the Christian ministry and calls it sacerdotium, in Latin term, obviously, also strongly affirms a universal priesthood of all believers. So it was kind of a both and, which is pretty much impossible, but he did that. Cyprian died 258, goes still further, so step by step, and applies all the privileges, duties, and responsibilities of the Aaronic priesthood to the officers of the Christian church and constantly calls them sacerdotes and sacerdotium. He may therefore be called the proper father of the sacerdotal conception of the Christian ministry as a mediating agency between God and the people. This is heresy. During the third century, right? Not the fourth of Constantine and Nicaea, the third century. It became customary to apply the term, priest directly and exclusively to the Christian ministers, especially the bishops. In the same manner, the whole ministry, and it alone, was called clergy, with a double reference to its presidency and its peculiar relation to God. It was distinguished by this name from the Christian people or laity. Thus the term clergy, which first signified the lot by which the office was assigned, that is to say, basically throwing dice, then the office itself, then the persons holding the office, was transferred from the Christians generally to the ministers exclusively. So you see the step by step process changing from what Jesus and the apostles set up, which didn't have this hierarchy, to this whole elaborate system. Solemn ordination or consecration by the laying of hands was the form of admission into the Ordo Ecclesiasticus or Sacerdotalis. In this order itself, there were again 3 degrees, the majors, the minors, and this is, I'm not going to read through all those details. Thus we find, so early as the 3rd century, the foundations of a complete hierarchy, though a hierarchy of only moral power and holding no sort of outward control over the conscience. The body of the laity consisted of 2 classes, the faithful and baptizing, and the catechumens who were preparing for baptism. Those church members who lived together in one place formed a church in the narrower sense. So we can see that while we rightly point to the Roman Emperor Constantine as the most powerful catalyst of this transformation of the body of Christ into a club or institution, we can see from these quotes that the seeds of hierarchy were well established before his rise to power. In fact, I believe that this usurping of the priesthood of the believer had to take place in order for Constantine to assimilate it into his government. So that's the backdrop of Nicaea. We haven't even talked about Nicaea, which wasn't until 325 AD, 4th century. So we know the backdrop. And now we'll look at the source about the primary agenda. So we're going to look at this, although it looks like Wikipedia, it is not Wikipedia. Wiki is a technology, basically a web technology, and anyone can set up a wiki site. Wikipedia just happens to be an encyclopedia application of that, just to make that clear. We're not in Wikipedia, okay? So the First Council of Nicaea, held in present-day Turkey, convoked by the Roman Emperor Constantine the First in 325, was the first ecumenical conference. That means everybody included, a general conference of the Christian Church outside of Acts 15, of course, resulted in the first uniform Christian doctrine. With the creation of the Nicene Creed, a precedent was established for subsequent general ecumenical councils of bishops, or synods, it's what they called their gatherings, to create statements of belief and canons of doctrinal unity. The intent being to define unity of beliefs for the whole of Christendom, a momentous event in the history of the church and subsequent history of Europe. So this does affect everybody. This is why people should know more about it, whether they're Christians or not. The purpose of the council was to resolve disagreements in the Church of Alexandria over the nature of Jesus in relationship to the Father. In particular, this gets dicey in here, whether Jesus was of the same or merely of similar substance as God the Father. And by the way, I'm going to be sometime in the future in a debate on the deity of Christ, and we're going to get even more detailed then. But right now, we're just going to read it. St. Alexandria of Alexandria and Athanasius, remember that name, took the first position, the deity of Christ. The popular presbyter Arius, from whom the term Arian controversy comes, took the second. That is to say, he was teaching that Jesus was not divine. The council decided against the Arians overwhelmingly. All but 2 voted against Arius. Another result of the council was an agreement on the date of the Christian Passover, which calling it a Christian Passover is a major problem right off the bat, but that's what they were saying. And again, this is not New Testament teaching. Okay, so most important feast of the ecclesiastical calendar. Again, there is no ecclesiastical calendar in the New Testament. In fact, there are statements against it. The council decided in favor of celebrating Jesus' resurrection, I think they left that out, on the first Sunday after the first full moon following the vernal equinox, independently of the Bible's Hebrew calendar. So that's where that came from, why Easter is when it is, why it varies from one year to the next. It has more to do with the heathen than the Bible. So anyway, it authorized the Bishop of Alexandria, presumably using the Alexandrian calendar, to announce annually the exact date. So that was the thing, is they wanted to fix the date of celebrating Easter. So those were the 2 main things on the agenda. We will see some more in a bit, but the elephant in the living room is what they did not talk about. But anyway, we'll get back to that. Council of Nicaea was historically significant because it was the first effort to attain consensus in the church through an assembly representing all of Christendom, whether all of Christendom agreed or not. The first occasion for the development of technical Christology, that's talking about the deity of Christ and really getting deep into the theology of whether he was or wasn't divine. Further, Constantine's role in the council was, viewed retrospectively, a clear precursor of future imperial control over the church.
Bingo!
Major red flag, lights with arrows flashing. This is the problem. Remember what we said earlier about the persecuted church. When somebody says, okay, you know what, Edict of Milan, we're not going to do that anymore, now we're going to make nice and play nice together and meld the church with the state. What a huge, huge, huge mistake. But when you're persecuted for that long, see how well you hold up. That's just what I'm saying. They're only human, but at the same time, this is the root of the false church right here. And the church state marrying. Yep.
I see the Hegelian dialectic all over this, with Satan's fingerprints also dead in the middle of this. Sorry for the interruption.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. That's why we do details. First Council of Nicaea was convened by Constantine I upon the recommendations of the Synod, and this charged with investigation of the trouble brought about by the Arian controversy in the Greek-speaking East. To most bishops, the teaching of Arius were heretical and a danger to salvation of souls. Why it was a big deal. In the summer of 325, they were all summoned to Nicaea, and the reason was that it was a central location for most people. Approximately 300 bishops attended. And bishops was a term, you will find these terms, bishop, episcopal, presbyter. These are based from Greek words that have different descriptions of the same thing: to oversee, to kind of manage, to guard the perimeter. You could use the word guardians, shepherds, all talking about the same thing. But in time, as we mentioned, they became offices, which the New Testament didn't teach. Anyway. So they had 300 of these leaders of some sort, whatever you want to consider them, that came. He had invited 1,800 people, but only 250 to 320 actually participated. So how ecumenical was it really? But these are the people who could, had the ability to get there, and Constantine paid their way. So, if they didn't want to come, they didn't want to come. But the point is, that they were, like I said, given free travel and lodging and all these sorts of things. And the timing of it had to do with the other issue of when to celebrate Easter. That's why the time of year was chosen the way it does, just to make that little point. But they talk about the players now in this debate. The Eastern bishops form the great majority of these. The first rank was held by 3 patriarchs: Alexander of Alexandria, Eustathius of Antioch, and Macarius of Jerusalem. And then they mention a bunch of other names. Let me skip down a little bit. Athanasius of Alexandria. So he was with the Alexandria group and was actually a main player in that and making that presentation in that debate. A young deacon and companion of the bishop, Alexander, was among the assistants. Athanasius eventually spent most of his life battling against Arianism. Alexander of Constantinople, then a presbyter, was also present as representative of his aged bishops. So the main bishop was elderly, so he had these assistants who really did the bulk of the work. Let's skip down a little bit. So the agenda of the synod: the Arian question, celebration of Passover, another little thing, the Meletian schism, which these things are all kind of related to the two main issues: the Father and Son in one in purpose or in person, the baptism of heretics, and the status of the lapsed in the persecution under Licinius. So most of that is really a side issue as far as we're concerned. They were big deals to them. But the council, it says, was formally opened May 20th in the palace. Let me see, that this is where also we get the Nicene Creed came out of this. Okay. In any case, it says the council went on. The Orthodox bishops won approval of every one of their proposals. After being in session for an entire month, the council promulgated on June 19th the original Nicene Creed. This profession of faith was adopted by all the bishops but 2 from Libya, who had been associated with Arius. So the point being that these creeds and songs and that sort of things, because most people either couldn't read or couldn't get access to a Bible, and so these things were developed as a concise Cliff Notes kind of thing. Too long didn't read, whatever you want to call it, so people could commit it to memory. That's the point of these things, are not to replace the Bible, but when it's the next best thing. Okay. Now, what about this Arian controversy? was a Christological dispute that began in Alexandria between Arius and Alexander. And then we can get, I'm not going to go over all these terms, but Alexander and his followers believed the Son was of the same substance as the Father, co-eternal with him. The Arians believed that they were different and that the Son, though he may be the most perfect of creations, was only a creation. A third group tried to make a compromise position and say the Father and Son were similar, but not quite the same, but, hair splitting. Much of the debate hinged on the difference between being born or created and being begotten. Arians saw these as the same. Alexander did not. And the meanings of all these words, this is hair splitting, like I said, words like essence, substance, nature, person, bore a variety of meanings drawn from pre-Christian philosophers, which could not but entail misunderstandings until they were cleared up. So we're quibbling over semantics here. What exactly do you mean by this word? And so these things had to be hashed out because the result of the confusion was Jesus God or not? And that's why details matter. So the council declared that the Father and Son are the same substance and are co-eternal, basing the declaration in the claim that this was a formulation of traditional Christian belief handed down from the apostles and expressed in the Nicene Creed. And we don't need to really go into the Nicene Creed because that grew out of that. And the thing about Easter, and then if you want to read about these other little things, you can. But the point I would like to make about these things is these disputes point out that first of all, that Christians are human. We're going to disagree. And this doesn't mean there's something wrong with God, the Bible, Jesus, or our faith. Not the problem. The problem is with the people, as it is in any group. When people condemn what a group believes or teaches, no matter if it's secular or religious, on the basis of something that has, they ignore the part that is us being human and flawed. And they base it on the belief instead that they're misplacing their critique, because that isn't the issue in most cases. Yes, there are bad teachings, certainly, but in most cases, it's a matter of misunderstanding what people, on their own side, the people who are the followers of the teachings don't always understand them. That's why we as Christians need to know what we believe and where some of these ideas stem from, because they have consequences. So the point is that there was a lot of squabbling going on that caused this council to be convened. So let me get to this statement down here, because this is really important. On July 25th, 325, in conclusion, the fathers of the council, that is to say the bigwigs, celebrated the emperor's 20th anniversary. In his valedictory address, Constantine again informed his hearers how averse he was to dogmatic controversy. He wanted the church to live in harmony and peace. In a circular letter, he announced the accomplished unity of practice by the whole church in the date of the celebration of the Christian Passover. Constantine cared nothing for the content of the Bible. All he wanted was unity. He was a secular government leader, the emperor, who said, stop fighting. I don't care what conclusion you come to, just reach one. So much for Constantine deciding what books were in the Bible. The whole council didn't even decide that. It wasn't on the agenda at all. It was mostly about squabbles about when to have Easter and whether the really thing that only really mattered was whether Jesus is God. Constantine didn't care. The council didn't care. Individually, yes, there were people who cared. They were obviously supposed to be Christian leaders. They would care. That's why they had a debate. But Constantine did not care. He wanted unity. It says so right there. And the long-term effects of the Council of Nicaea were significant. For the first time, representatives of many of the bishops of the church convened to agree on a doctrinal statement. Compromise, Hegelian dialectic, whatever you want to call it. Also, for the first time, the emperor played a role by calling together the bishops under his authority, big problem, and using the power of the state to give the council's orders effect. He was the muscle. It was always going to be a squabble until somebody would come along with guns or swords and enforce it. That's what this was. This was the start, it says here, of the Constantinian shift and entangling of church and state that still gives rise to debate today. But in the short term, the council did not completely solve the problems. It didn't stop here. The Arians and the Meletian soon regained nearly all of the rights they had lost, and Arianism continued to spread and cause division in the church during the remainder of the 4th century, and I might add it goes on today. It's basically the root of Jehovah's Witness beliefs and a couple of other things. Almost immediately, Eusebius of Nicomedia used his influence at court to sway Constantine's favor from the Orthodox Nicene bishops to the Arians. He switched sides. Eustathius of Antioch was deposed and exiled. Athanasius, remember him, who had succeeded Alexander as Bishop of Alexandria, was deposed by the First Synod of Tyre. You never hear about that one, in 335. Marcellus of Ancyra followed him in 336. Arius himself returned to Constantinople to be readmitted into the church, but died shortly before he could be received. Constantine died the next year after finally receiving baptism from an Arian bishop. And with his passing, the first round in the battle after the Council of Nicaea was ended. So it really accomplished very few of its goals beyond establishing Easter and debating the deity of Christ, although, again, it was overturned very quickly afterwards. So what do you learn from all of that? I think instead of me just going over that again, let me say this one thing, and then we'll have questions and comments. Notice especially what was not on the agenda, the canon. It wasn't until 367 AD that Athanasius made a complete list of the 66 books as we know them. The Council and Constantine were not involved. And if you want, we can look at the details of why and when Athanasius selected the books. I'm just going to do this real quick. He distinguished those from other books that were widely circulated, and he noted that those 66 books were the ones, and the only ones, universally accepted. In other words, he just said, what are we not arguing about? We'll put that in the canon. Nobody disputes these books. That's how we wound up with the canon as a formal list. It was his work. Already before that, nobody disputed it. He just put a stamp on it. That's all he did. Questions and comments?
Yeah, this stamps out all the evolution or us site people coming in talking about the Council of Nicaea. They have no clue whatsoever what they're talking about. Thank you very much. 10th.
Good work there, Paula. When you look at how the Jews, through their priestly order, were fooled by the high priests because most of them were illiterate. And once they got the scriptures and they could read it, they realized they were being lied to by the phony priests. Well, the same thing could be said here. We have the Bible. It was the Catholic Church that was punishing Christians for printing the Bible for the common man, like William Tyndale. Once the people saw the Bible, they realized that these state churches or phony churches, whatever you want to call them, that they did not jive with the Bible. And this is what's so beautiful about how God works. The Bible itself was kept pure. And what happened is if anyone picks up the Bible like I did 46 years ago and start reading it, I realized the Catholic Church lied to me because it's right there in the Bible. So any attempt to say all these councils did something to hide something, it didn't work. It actually exposed everything because they never thought the common man was ever going to get to see the actual manuscripts. So again, I say well done here.
Outstanding, 10th. Betty.
Yeah, I think there comes a sentence to mind is if you can't beat them, then join them. So if that movement of the Christians was so huge and big and things, then the devil would have that thought like, okay, this doesn't work. I can't eradicate these people because they thrive on that, basically. Then we have to do it some different way. And I think that's what you said earlier, John, with the stamp of the devil on this. I can totally agree with that. There was some things going on there, but it wasn't about the true nature of the content of the Bible, I think. I didn't know about the guy that put together these 66 books, because I think that the Catholics have a couple of books more, I think,
Right.
like the Maccabees and stuff. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know where those came from then, maybe later. Did they come later or what?
Well, the Apocrypha is a general term for those intertestamental books. They were things written during the time between basically Malachi and Matthew. They were during the several hundred years when God was not speaking to Israel through prophets. And so they give a lot of historical background. So they're not entirely false, but they're clearly not inspired either, and they were never accepted as canon. They were part of some of the, not the very earliest, but some of the copies of the Septuagint. They were included as well as history, because the Septuagint collection and anybody's collection of books didn't always only include that which they considered inspired by God. They included other things too, because they're historical. So that's where those come from. And at some point, I forget the exact year, the Catholic Church decided to include those. And even at first, I don't have the exact reference, but they knew and said, this is not inspired scripture, but it's valuable. So even the early versions of Catholic Bibles included those.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Good put together of all these facts, basically.
So
now we know where Easter came from. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not going to be hearing anything about Constantine and Constantine putting together the Bible, right? Not going to hear that anymore, are we? Yeah. Tomorrow.
Yeah, we might not hear it today.
Well, it depends how you do your research, because if you usually find the things that you want to find sometimes,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think it's a rule also. People can't think outside of their boxes, basically, and try to really go to the other side and see what is in the arguments that other people make, and where does things come from. And it's very difficult research. That's so kudos for bringing this up.
That's why we have Paula.
Yeah, invested a lot of her time in this already, right?
No.
No. I have no idea how much.
No.
Yeah, and what age did you begin with
I started when I was 15. I kind of a recommitment, just a formal saying to God, you can do what you want with me. I was given an insatiable appetite for studying the Word, and that's what I started when I was 15.
Yeah, but were you were a Christian all your life then, or when did that happen?
I can't remember a time when I didn't believe in God and that Jesus rose from the dead. But I do think it's important for everybody, especially if you grew up with that in a Christian home, is to, as at least approaching adulthood, reconfirm that, because as a child, you don't have the capacity to understand everything. I always believed it, but at a point in time, I said, "Okay, I'm your disciple. My life isn't mine." So it wasn't as though I was an unbeliever and then became a believer. It was, I made a commitment to be a disciple at age 15.
Okay. So you baptized again, or for the first time then?
First time wasn't until 2 years later, because I didn't like the arm twisting and pressure that most Christians brought to people to get baptized. It's like, show me in the Bible when, where, how, why, and nobody would do it. They would just lay guilt trips on me. So I waited until I saw for myself why I wanted to do it.
I think that's it.
Yeah, it took 2 years.
Yeah. Well, it's like I said, it's a journey, right? The whole coming towards God and getting a closer relationship. It's a journey. It's not something that you. Yeah, some people have that instantly, because they have these life-changing moments maybe in their life. But But it's
Right.
not for everybody that we can say, well, okay, this is it, and now I know everything, and that's done.
Right. And I would say there's nothing in the New Testament that requires it. Nothing can be required of salvation when it's a gift. But I have read the canons and decrees of the Council of Trent. That's another council I'm not even going to get into today, but it's much later. It's put out by the Catholic Church, of course. I read the whole thing, and I got a yellow highlighter and highlighted the word anathema hundreds of times. It's a curse against anyone who does not agree with their statements. And one is believers' baptism. They think that's heresy and worthy of cursing to believe that you should be baptized as a knowing believer rather than as an infant. So basically, they condemn everything that the Bible teaches as far as salvation goes. And then they've never rescinded it. But what they do now is say, well, anathema doesn't have the strong meaning you're giving it. Well, it did when they wrote it. But I mean, we could go on and on and on and on about this. I mean, and it's not to say also that Protestant churches don't have their issues as well. There's a lot wrong with them too. But just to.
Well, I think that the whole baptism thing isn't especially acquired, but I think it's still a sort of a step into faith itself, right? It's an action that you
I would
do.
say it's just a way of publicly proclaiming something, and it helps us more than it helps anyone else. As far as any kind of something you can point to that you did, that you said, this is when I made my commitment. You know, it's a personal thing.
Yeah, I do that. Yeah, that's what I believe. Yeah, because I was baptized as a baby. I mean, that was in the Catholic Church a common thing to do, because they didn't want, if your child would die, then at least it would be saved. That kind of idea. But,
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
that's what they teach.
But I decided when I really became a Christian to let myself be baptized, and not in a church, just in water in the Netherlands somewhere. Easy to find, by the way.
I have
that's
a
the
funny
trick.
story. Huh?
No, I was going to say, Tibet, that's the trick they play on people as a church, saying we represent God. So if you want to make sure your babies don't go to hell, come here and baptize them as infants. We'll take care of that for you. So this is playing on the fears of parents in the event their child dies before they come of age, to where they can decide. It's so demonic. It's ridiculous.
Exactly. And one thing I was going to say is from my one of our family histories, a relative of mine, I forget how many generations back, was a preacher, and he was thrown out of his church because in the middle of winter an old man wanted to be baptized, and he didn't want to take him to the river, so he'd freeze to death. So he got a tub of water and baptized him in that, and the church threw him out. Those are the kind of ancestors I have.
Oh.
Well, that makes sense with the baby in the bathwater.
Yeah. Why are we so tough on each other? I mean, I've heard about people being baptized in underneath a shower because they didn't have a tub, right? But people still want to do that act of faith and be baptized and sort of have a sort of thing going on, and they had the beautiful experience by that. And I don't think that we should be boxing God in that sense by letting people from the church decide whether you could be baptized in what day and manner at all. I mean, I wasn't even baptized by church members in that sense. It were just followers of Jesus.
And the thief and the thief on the cross never got baptized.
Yeah, but technically he wasn't a Christian, so he was before Jesus died. So how could he be?
I love it.
Anyway, that gets complicated, but
He's in paradise.
Yeah, but yeah, the point
he stole his way into heaven then, huh?
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's a different topic.
Interesting though.
Right. So many different rabbit trails you could go down with this, but The point being that these councils, especially the First Council of Nicaea and Constantine the First, which most critics don't even know there's a first of, that there were more, this is what they throw at you in rolling chants and think that they've made some kind of point, like kids throwing rocks through your window and running away. And why I typically try not to engage them in debates in that way, because you can't do this. You can't present the details, and they wouldn't listen if you did. But it's here if they want it. That's the important thing.
Are we rolling to the second council, Paula?
Yeah, and I think I'll just go ahead and go through the last few things and finish in this section, because it's not real involved. So,
okay.
All right.
You're up.
Second council. Sorry?
I said, go ahead. You're up.
All right. Second council was until 787 AD. Look at this span, 325, and then the next one in 787 as far as Nicaea goes. According to New World Encyclopedia, you can chase this down if you want, the primary agenda was to restore the adoration of icons and relics.
Oh, brother.
And to forbid women from residing in monasteries or the houses of bishops to avoid the appearance of immorality. In other words, they didn't want any hanky-panky going on. That's what this council was about. The canon was still not on the agenda. Constantine VI presided. Obviously, couldn't be the same Constantine, could it, after that many 100 years? There were 6 of them, at least. And I don't know if there was a 7th, but that's the thing. This Second Council of Nicaea was about adoring icons and relics and avoiding impropriety, which didn't, of course, work. They just got sneakier about it, but that's what that was about and why nobody talks about it. But again, there was nothing about the canon on it, and none of the Constantines had anything to do with the canon. Other councils, I'm going to look real quick at this link. Here's another list from that site, standard disclaimer. We've got at least 12 of these, and they were listed by Bruce Metzger. And Bruce Metzger is a big name among Bible scholars, so not just some guy on the internet. This is a well-known scholar. I have some of his books on my shelf. So, yeah, a big deal. But you can see all these other synods and councils, and if you want to chase down what they were talking about, go ahead, knock yourself out. But I really don't get into these because they don't matter. The biggest one was the First Council of Nicaea and Constantine I, and even that wasn't about what most people think it was. So, to conclude, critics of the Bible simply parrot the mantra, Constantine and the Roman Catholic Church decided the canon at the Council of Nicaea. No details, no dates, no research. But the important fact is that the New Testament never ordered any future councils. Doctrine and practices were set by the original apostles, which never included rules about icons, church buildings, sacred calendars, clergy, memberships, rituals, or anything else associated with tradition. So, appeals to post-apostolic councils are as somehow having any biblical weight or authority are red herring fallacies against the Bible and anything it teaches. Questions and comments?
Good night. That's it's over, right? All the ignorant nonsense spouted. I know I'm not the only one that has received this nonsense for years about the Council of Nicaea, la, 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 Constantine, la, la, la. Jeez. Educate yourself, people.
6 of them?
Please. Thanks.
Sorry?
6 Constantines?
Yes, at least. Like I said, I don't know. I didn't look further to see if there was a 7th, but there were 6 of them.
Sounds like
just find a more normal name. I mean, a more.
Well,
it's a title.
Yeah, it's a title like Caesar.
It's a title. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it starts out as somebody's name, and then it becomes a title, like with Constantine, because you took the office of that person, that emperor. Like with pharaohs, there's more than one pharaoh in Egypt.
Yeah, and you had that town, right? The city, Constantinople. I think
Yeah,
that's
named after him.
Yeah.
Which is Istanbul now.
Yeah, he moved the entire. He got sick of it in Rome and moved it to Constantinople. Not too many people. I don't hear anyone talking about that. Why not?
They didn't know, but they sure can tell you what's wrong with you.
Yeah. So true. 10th. I guess we're gonna run around final thoughts. So
Yeah.
10th, final thoughts.
Yeah. Great job, Paula. A lot of memories, but you've condensed it quite well and succinctly. And hats off to you for doing the work that allows you to share it this, plainly for everyone to understand. That's all I got to say. It was just fantastic.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Betty.
Oh, I was just going on mute instead of. How stupid of me.
Yeah, very well played.
No, I've got nothing to add. But very interesting to go over this. Yes.
It's an outstanding presentation, Paula.
Thank you.
I really don't know what to say. I've learned so much just over the past hour. I already knew most of it. I knew that the Bible was already codified well before Nicaea. I knew that. But you just laid it out perfectly. Makes sense, too. And everyone can see how this got corrupted as soon as the apostles went away, right? And how Satan's hands were all over this and continue to be all over it. I can smell them 1,000 miles away. Next week? Or do you want to conclude? Do you want to conclude on this? Main thoughts, Paula?
Again, just what I've had up there on the screen with the conclusion is that when people say some claim about the Bible or Constantine or the councils or the Jesuits or whoever it is, they rarely have done adequate research, if they've done any at all. And the research usually comes from hostile sources only. They don't go to anybody. They haven't heard of Philip Schaff or any of these other Harry Ironside or any of these historians. They just shoot from the hip. And the bad part is not that they do that, but the Christians don't counter because they don't know this either. That's what's really sad. Next time will be, if I can get it all prepared before then, is on the church versus Israel. And this is a dividing point. It's where people who are saved have legitimate disagreements and part ways because we're just human and I have no delusions about fixing the rift. It's not going to happen, but I will present it to the best of my ability and present facts as well as I can and let people decide from that.
Thanks again, Paula. Outstanding. Listen, guys, next week is going to be a barn burner. Let me tell you, because there's a lot of problems with this. How would you want to put it? Ideology? It's really simple to me. I'm not going to state where I stand on it. It's very clear to me in Scripture. But tune in because I think it's going to be highly educational, if nothing else. So remember, take no prisoners. No quarter will be asked. None shall be given. And remember, I'll be back.